The 19th century was an age of supreme confidence. It was an era of steam and steel, of empires that spanned the globe, and of a relentless, unshakable belief in the power of human progress. Science, it was believed, could solve any problem. It could tame nature, conquer disease, and build a new, more orderly world from the chaos of the past. And in the heart of this new world, they built monuments. They were not cathedrals to God, but to a new kind of faith, a faith in the perfectibility of the human mind. They were called asylums, sanatoriums, retreats. The names themselves were a promise of peace, of sanctuary. They rose from the English countryside and the American plains like grand country estates. Their magnificent Gothic towers and sprawling symmetrical wings, a statement of civic pride and scientific ambition. Architects like Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride dreamt of moral architecture, designing buildings where the very layout, the long airy corridors, the abundant windows, the peaceful gardens, was itself a form of treatment. This was to be a new enlightenment. The age of chains, dungeons, and whips was over. The mad would no longer be hidden away in shame. They would be brought into the light, studied, understood, and, with kindness and reason, they would be cured. This was the promise, etched into the cornerstone of every one of these great and terrible buildings. It was a promise made to the public, to the politicians, and to the families who, with heavy hearts, brought their loved ones to the asylum gates. It was a comforting, noble, and profoundly dangerous lie. To understand the truth of these places, we cannot be tourists in the past. We cannot simply observe the ruins from a safe, modern distance. We must walk their halls, not as historians, but as inmates. We must see the world through their eyes. So let us begin. The year is 1885. Your world has become muted, grey. A grief you cannot name has settled in your bones. A private sorrow that has made you quiet, withdrawn. You are not violent. You are not irrational. You are simply sad. But in the rigid, unforgiving world of Victorian society, your sadness is an inconvenience. It is a disruption to the proper order of things. Your family, with whispers of concern that barely mask their frustration, has consulted a doctor. He is a man of science, of stern confidence. He does not listen to your heart. He observes your symptoms. After a brief examination, he gives your condition a name, a label that transforms your private pain into a public pathology. He calls it melancholia, or perhaps hysteria, or neurasthenia. The name does not matter. It is a diagnosis not of a sickness in your mind, but of a deviation from the norm. You are brought here, to this magnificent building on the hill. It looks more like a university or a palace than any hospital you have ever seen. A man in a white coat greets your family with a reassuring smile. He speaks of rest, of routine, of a moral treatment that will restore your spirits. You look at the manicured lawns, the imposing, confident architecture, and you allow yourself to feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps this is a place of healing. You walk through the great oak doors. They are heavy, solid. They close behind you with a sound of profound finality. A lock turns. In that moment, your life ceases to be your own. The palace is a prison. The cure is a punishment. The doctors are your jailers. This, then, is the central puzzle. How did an era so obsessed with propriety, with charity, with the forward march of Christian morality, create a system of such meticulous and institutionalized cruelty? How were thousands of ordinary people, sad daughters, inconvenient wives, failed businessmen, political dissenters, stripped of their rights, their identities, and their sanity, all in the name of a cure that never was? To find the answer, we must stay here, inside these walls. We must trade our names for numbers, our clothes for coarse uniforms. We must eat the bland food, walk the endless corridors, and submit to the wisdom of the mad doctors. We must understand that the Victorian Asylum was not merely a failed hospital. It was a perfect reflection of the society that built it, a mirror for its deepest anxieties. It was a machine designed with scientific precision to contain everything the Victorian world feared: disorder, emotion, poverty, rebellion, and above all, the inconvenient woman. Welcome to Bedlam. Your treatment is about to begin. Your new life begins in a small, sterile office, smelling of carbolic acid and old paper. The man across the desk from you is the asylum's medical superintendent. He is the sovereign of this small kingdom, a figure of immense and unchecked authority. He has read the committal letter from your family doctor, his face a mask of serene, professional concern. He holds your fate in his hands, yet he will not grasp the truth of it. He asks you questions, but he does not truly listen to your answers. His inquiry is not a dialogue. It is the observation of a specimen. You try to explain. You speak of the profound grief that has settled in your bones, a private sorrow that has made you quiet, withdrawn, a ghost in your own home. You describe the sleepless nights, the hollowness in your chest, the simple wearying ache of a heart in mourning. These are the words of a human being experiencing a universal loss. But in this room, your words are translated into a different, more sinister language. They are filtered through the rigid, unforgiving lens of Victorian psychiatry, and what emerges is not a portrait of a person, but a pathology of a patient. Your sadness, he explains with a paternalistic calm that is more terrifying than any anger, is not a natural response. It is a symptom. It is evidence of a deep constitutional weakness, a dangerous excess of emotion that has overwhelmed your rational female mind. He must give your condition a name, a label that transforms your private pain into a public disease. He diagnoses you with hysteria. Hysteria. The word itself is ancient, rooted in fear and ignorance. It comes from the Greek hystera, meaning the womb. The physicians of ancient Greece, and even Egypt before them, believed that a woman's uterus was a distinct, animate creature within her body. When deprived of a child or regular marital relations, they theorized, this restless womb could become light and dry, detaching from its proper place and wandering throughout the body in search of moisture. If it rose to the chest, it caused suffocation and frantic palpitations. If it reached the throat, it brought on seizures, fainting spells, and a sense of choking. The cure, they reasoned, was to lure the womb back to its rightful position. A physician might apply foul-smelling substances to the woman's nose to repel the womb downwards, while simultaneously applying sweet-smelling perfumes to her thighs to entice it back into place. For 2,000 years, this idea that a woman's mind, health, and very soul were held hostage by the whims of her reproductive organs never truly vanished. It slithered through the centuries, shedding its mystical skin and cloaking itself in the modern language of science. By the 19th century, the womb was no longer seen as a wandering animal, but its influence was considered just as absolute. The Victorian doctor saw it as the epicenter of the female nervous system, the source of a volatile energy that, if not properly managed through marriage, motherhood, and domestic tranquility, would inevitably overflow and short-circuit the rational mind. And so, hysteria became the great phantom malady of the age, a medical justification for a social ideology. It was a bottomless trunk into which any and all forms of undesirable female behavior could be conveniently discarded. The definition of the illness became a catalogue of female rebellion, both large and small. Did a young woman, like yourself, find more solace in the pages of a novel than in the drudgery of domestic chores? This was a dangerous symptom. Novels, doctors warned, inflame the imagination with tales of passion and romance, creating unrealistic expectations and making a woman dissatisfied with the pious, subservient role God and society had ordained for her. Did a wife dare to express sexual desire, or conversely, a lack of it for her husband? Both were clear signs of a disordered, hysterical mind. Did she challenge her husband's authority, express a political opinion, or seek a higher education? These were not acts of intellect, but aberrations, a masculine ambition that proved her female nature was out of balance, her mind diseased. Postpartum depression, premenstrual tension, chronic fatigue, anxiety, a refusal to eat, a sudden outburst of weeping, all were swept under the single, damning banner of hysteria. It was the perfect, circular logic of a patriarchal society. The very qualities that defined you as a woman, your emotional depth, your capacity for passion, your biological cycles, were simultaneously presented as the evidence of your inherent madness. Your grief is not seen as a wound to be healed. It is a constitutional flaw. You are not a person in pain, you are a woman out of control, a problem to be solved and above all to be contained. You are, however, not alone in your powerlessness. This system, built to enforce conformity, has a cage for every kind of dissident. The men who walk these halls, their faces etched with a different but no less profound despair, are prisoners of a different set of expectations. Their sanity was measured against the brutal yardstick of industrial capitalism and rigid Victorian masculinity, and they too were found wanting. Look at the man staring blankly from the window of the day room. 6 months ago, he was a respected merchant, a pillar of his community. But a stock market crash, a distant ripple of global finance he could neither predict nor control, wiped out his fortune overnight. His financial ruin was not seen as a tragedy or a misfortune. It was diagnosed as a personal, moral failing. His inability to provide for his family, to uphold his masculine duty, was proof of a weak character, a mind unequal to the pressures of the modern world. This weakness, the doctors concluded, caused him to descend into a deep melancholia. His bankruptcy was not the cause of his illness. It was its first symptom. Look at the man pacing the corridor, his hands trembling, his eyes wide with a permanent state of alarm. He worked 16 hours a day in the relentless, deafening noise of a steel mill, his body and mind worn down to a nub by exhaustion. The doctors, ever eager to coin a new disease, gave his condition a modern, sophisticated name: neurasthenia, the sickness of the civilized man. They wrote scholarly articles about it, blaming the frantic pace of the modern world, the telegraph, the railway, the constant pressure of commerce for overwhelming the delicate nervous system. It was a fashionable diagnosis, a respectable mental illness for the middle-class man. But they did not blame the brutal working conditions or the rapacious factory owner. They blamed an inherent weakness in the man's own constitution. He was simply not built for the glorious, roaring engine of progress. And there were real, organic diseases, misunderstood and terrifying. A common diagnosis in these wards was general paralysis of the insane. The patient would first exhibit delusions of grandeur, claiming to be a king, an inventor, or a millionaire. This would be followed by a slow, inexorable decay of the body and mind, leading to dementia, paralysis, and death. We know this today as the devastating final stage of syphilis, a neurological disease. But to the Victorian doctor, it was simply another form of madness, its sufferers locked away alongside grieving widows and exhausted labourers, their shared fates sealed by a system that had no tools for diagnosis and no capacity for a cure. And then there are the most dangerous men of all, the thinkers, the union organisers who spoke of workers' rights, the political dissenters who called for revolution, the atheists who dared to question the authority of the church. Their radical ideas were not debated in the public square. They were diagnosed in the doctor's office. To the conservative Victorian establishment, such beliefs could not be the product of a rational intellect. They must be the ravings of a deranged mind. They were not political prisoners. They were patients, their inconvenient philosophies neatly filed away as moral insanity, their voices silenced not by a censor, but by a medical certificate. For every man and every woman who entered these gates, the asylum served the same ultimate purpose. It was a warehouse for the inconvenient, a place to dispose of those who failed, for whatever reason, to perform their designated role in the great grinding machine of society. But a diagnosis, however arbitrary, required the veneer of objective, scientific justification. And the science of the day was a dark and fascinating tapestry of brilliant observation, wild speculation, and deeply ingrained prejudice. To confirm his initial assessment of you, the superintendent now begins a more thorough physical examination. He runs his cool, dry fingers over your skull, a practice known as phrenology. He is a cartographer of your character, and he believes your very soul can be mapped on the terrain of your head. He explains that every human sentiment, love, greed, piety, destructiveness, resides in a specific organ of the brain. An overdeveloped organ creates a bump, an underdeveloped one, an indentation. He probes your scalp, searching for the bump of amativeness that might suggest a dangerous sexuality, or perhaps an underdeveloped organ of cautiousness to explain your melancholic disposition. The shape of your head, he declares, is a map of your innate madness. Next, he studies your face with an intense, unsettling gaze. This is physiognomy, the belief that your inner character is written upon your outer features. He notes the distance between your eyes, the shape of your nose, the line of your jaw. Are they symmetrical? Are they refined? Or do they betray a hint of coarseness, a shadow of the primitive that marks you as less evolved, more susceptible to base animal instincts? This science was frequently used to reinforce the prejudices of the day, with textbooks claiming to identify the archetypal face of the criminal or the features of the imbecile, which often corresponded with the racial stereotypes of the Irish or other immigrant groups. Finally, and most terrifyingly, he delves into your bloodline. This is the age of hereditary degeneracy, a theory that would soon blossom into the dark science of eugenics. It is the belief that insanity, poverty, and criminality are not social conditions, but biological traits, a bad seed passed down through generations. He asks about your relatives. Do you have an eccentric uncle? A cousin who drank? A grandmother who suffered from what the family politely called nerves? You answer honestly, unaware that you are weaving the final threads of your own cage. The artistic temperament of your uncle is reframed as latent instability. Your cousin's drinking is not a weakness, but but a hereditary disease. Your grandmother's nerves are re-diagnosed decades after her death as proof of a tainted lineage that has now manifested in you. Your fate, the doctor concludes with grim satisfaction, was not decided by your life, but by your birth. Your grief was merely the trigger that unleashed the madness already lurking in your blood. The science is complete. The diagnosis is confirmed. All that remains is the formality of your commitment. The law, which should be your shield, now becomes your sword's point. An Act of Parliament, the Lunacy Act of 1845, was intended to protect the mentally ill, to move them from squalid workhouses into proper hospitals. But in its effort to streamline care, it also streamlined commitment, creating a system ripe for abuse. For you, a woman in 1885, the legal barrier to lifelong incarceration is terrifyingly low. Your husband, your father, or your brother can have you confined with the signatures of just 2 doctors. In some cases, especially if your family is wealthy and influential, a single signature will suffice. There is no trial by jury. There is no legal counsel to speak for you. There is only the medical certificate, a document of immense power, declaring you to be of unsound mind and a danger to yourself. It is a legal instrument that gives one person or one family the power to make another simply disappear. And so you protest. The last vestiges of your hope give way to a rising, cold panic. You speak clearly. You reason logically. You list the facts of your case, the simple, undeniable truth of your grief. You plead with your family, who stand by the doctor's side, their faces a mask of pity and firm resolve. They have been convinced by the power of medical authority that this is for your own good, a necessary, if painful, step toward your recovery. Your rational arguments have the opposite of their intended effect. The doctor watches your protest, not with an open mind, but with the cool, detached gaze of a clinician observing a predictable set of symptoms. He makes a note in your file. The patient, he writes, has become agitated and argumentative, a common reaction when the hysteric is confronted with her own condition. She exhibits a cunning denial and a lack of insight that further confirms the initial diagnosis. This is the asylum's perfect, unbreakable trap. It is a fortress of logic where all reason is turned against itself. Your every action is reinterpreted to fit the narrative of your madness. If you are quiet and withdrawn, you are suffering from melancholia. If you weep, you are emotionally unstable. If you protest your innocence, you are defiant and aggressive. If you fall into a stoic silence, you are catatonic. And if you state, calmly and rationally, that you are sane, then you are afflicted with the most damning symptom of all, a complete lack of insight into the severity of your own illness. Your powerlessness is now absolute. Your identity has been erased and replaced by a case file. Your arguments have been dismissed as the ravings of the unwell. Your future has been signed away. 2 nurses, their faces impassive and accustomed to such scenes, take you firmly by the arms. You are led away from the office, away from the last connection to your old life, and deeper into the labyrinth of the asylum. The echo of your own voice, pleading for reason in a world that has declared it insane, fades behind you. The first chapter of your new life, the life of a patient, has begun. The office door closes, and the world you knew is gone forever. You are escorted by 2 nurses down a long, echoing corridor. Their grip is firm, impersonal, practiced. They do not speak to you. They speak about you. Their voice is flat and procedural as they confirm your details with a ward attendant. You have ceased to be a person deserving of dialogue. You are now a task to be completed, a body to be processed, and filed away. They lead you to an admission room, a space scrubbed of all character. It is a cold, tiled chamber, stripped of any comfort or decoration, designed for clinical efficiency. It smells of lye, damp linen, and the faint, unsettling aroma of human despair. This is the antechamber of your new existence, the place where the last vestiges of your former self will be systematically and dispassionately stripped away. You are ordered to undress. The command is not shouted, it is spoken calmly, which makes it all the more absolute. There is no privacy here, no concession to the modesty that your entire life has taught you to cherish. Your clothes, the familiar fabric of the life you have lost, the dress that holds the faint scent of your own home, are taken from you. They are bundled away, perhaps to be baked in a delousing oven and stored in a vast, forgotten repository, perhaps to be burned. You will never see them again. Along with them go your shoes, your locket, the small, personal treasures that tethered you to your own history. You are left standing, exposed and shivering, under the cold, indifferent gaze of the attendants who have performed this ritual 1,000 times. This stripping is not merely for hygiene, it is a deliberate psychological tool, the first and most crucial step in breaking down the morbid ego of the patient. To rebuild you, the doctors believe, they must first demolish you. Your identity, bound up in the clothes you chose and the objects you cherished, is an obstacle to the institution's goals. It must be removed. Next comes the bath. It is not a gentle immersion. It is a functional, almost agricultural scouring. The water is cold. The soap is a harsh, yellow bar of lye that stings your skin. You are scrubbed with a rough brush, not as a person, but as an object being prepared for storage. A physical examination follows, intrusive and humiliating. Your body searched and prodded for lice, for sores, for any physical imperfection that must be noted down in the great admissions ledger. You are weighed. You are measured. Your details are recorded in neat, cursive script on a page filled with other names, other numbers. Finally, you are given the uniform. It is a shapeless, drab dress of rough, heavy calico or linsey-woolsey, a fabric that seems designed to perpetually scratch and irritate the skin. It is dyed a dull, indistinct color, grey or brown, or a faded, depressing blue. It does not fit. It hangs on you, a sackcloth testament to your new status. Your name, the sound that has defined you since birth, is now officially irrelevant. You are assigned a number. It is stitched onto the collar of your new dress, a permanent label. This number is your new name. It is how you will be counted, how you will be logged, how your meals and medications and punishments will be recorded. The process is complete. You have been unmade, reduced to a set of measurements, a clinical diagnosis, and a 3-digit number. Your dehumanization has begun. You are now a citizen of a secret city, an immense, self-contained world, a universe unto itself, sealed off from the society that built it and then chose to forget it. From the outside, the asylum is a masterpiece of Victorian ambition, a cathedral of compassion. It is likely a creation of the Kirkbride Plan, the great utopian vision of American Quaker physician Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride. He was a genuine humanitarian, a reformer who was appalled by the sight of the mentally ill chained in squalid cellars and poorhouses. He believed that the very architecture of an asylum could be the primary curative force. His vision, laid out in his influential treatise, was elegant and profoundly optimistic. He envisioned a central administration building, the symbolic head of the great body, flanked by a series of tiered wings, set back from one another in a shallow V shape, like the echelon formation of a flock of birds. This design ensured that every patient's room had a view of the surrounding countryside and received ample sunlight and fresh air. The wings were segregated, creating a gradient of care. The most agitated and furious patients would be housed in the wards at the farthest ends, shielded from the rest of the hospital. As a patient recovered, they would be moved progressively closer to the central building, their journey along the corridor a physical manifestation of their journey back to sanity. Kirkbride's designs were built on a foundation of enlightened ideals, that madness was a temporary state, a darkness that could be banished by an environment of rational design, moral uplift, and therapeutic beauty. That was the theory, a noble dream etched in brick and stone. The reality, as you are now beginning to see from the inside, is a grotesque and tragic parody of that dream. The asylum was designed to hold 250 patients, the maximum number Kirkbride believed a single superintendent could effectively manage. It now houses over 1,000 souls. The state legislatures, having spent vast sums on the construction of these palaces, quickly grew tired of funding their expensive operation. Budgets were slashed, staffing was cut. The asylum's purpose shifted, subtly but inexorably, from curative to custodial. It was no longer a hospital, it was a human warehouse. The long, airy wings, meant for quiet convalescence, are now crammed with beds, packed so tightly together that you can reach out and touch the fitfully sleeping woman on either side of you. The great windows, designed to let in the light of recovery, are now covered with thick iron bars, a constant reminder that this is a prison. The healing air that circulates through the ward is not the sweet scent of the countryside. It is a thick, institutional miasma, a layering of unwashed bodies, stale food, poorly managed chamber pots, and the ever-present, stinging aroma of carbolic disinfectant. The walls, once painted in calming colors, are now stained and peeling. The floors are worn, the furniture splintered. The building itself seems to be succumbing to a slow, creeping decay, mirroring the decay of the ideals upon which it was founded. And there is the sound. There is no peace here, day or night. The therapeutic quiet Kirkbride envisioned has become a constant, maddening cacophony. During the day, it is the shuffling of 1,000 feet on stone floors, the clanging of iron doors being locked and unlocked, the distant, hellish drone of the laundry machines in the basement, the shouting of orders by overworked attendants, the metallic rattle of food trolleys. At night, it is something worse. It is a symphony from the deepest parts of human despair. From the other wards, you hear a chorus of incoherent moans, sudden, piercing shrieks that tear through the darkness, the rhythmic, percussive banging of a head against a padded wall, the desperate, garbled prayers of the pious, and the endless, heartbreaking weeping of the lost and the grieving. This is the true sound of the total institution. It is the soundtrack of your new home. Your days quickly fall into a routine of soul-crushing, predictable monotony. The rhythm of your life is no longer dictated by the sun or the seasons, but by the harsh, clanging sound of a bell that seems to vibrate in your very bones. It wakes you at 5:30 before dawn, when the ward is still dark and bitterly cold. You and the 50 other women in your dormitory rise in silence. You are given moments to use the shared, foul-smelling lavatories before being marched to the dining hall. Breakfast is always the same. A bowl of thin, lumpy porridge or oatmeal, a thick slice of the heavy asylum bread, and a mug of weak, lukewarm tea. You eat in silence at long, bare wooden tables, under the watchful eyes of the attendants. After the meal comes the work. The doctors call it moral therapy. It is another of Kirkbride's great ideals, the theory that hard, repetitive labor would occupy the disordered mind, instill discipline, and provide a sense of purpose. It was meant to mimic the honest work of the outside world, to retrain the patient for a productive life. This, too, has become a perversion of its original intent. The asylum is a vast, self-sufficient city, and it runs on the unpaid labor of its inmates. Your therapy is the work that keeps the institution functioning, saving the state the expense of hired staff. The nature of your work is strictly gendered. As a woman, you are assigned to domestic toil. You might be sent to the laundry, the heart of the institution's industry. You spend 10 hours a day in a room filled with scalding, oppressive steam, and the fumes of harsh lye soap, your hands raw and red, washing the endless mountains of soiled linen and uniforms for 1,000 patients. Or you might be assigned to the mending room, your eyes straining in the dim light as you patch the same coarse garments day after day, your mind numbed by the repetitive motion of the needle. Or you are given a bucket of cold grey water and a coarse brush and set to scrubbing the seemingly endless stone corridors of the asylum, a task that is never, ever complete. The men, meanwhile, perform the heavy labour. They work on the asylum's vast farm, tending the crops and livestock that will feed you. They work in the workshops, making shoes, brushes, or mattresses. They might work in the asylum's own quarry or its coal gas plant. Their work is different, but their condition is the same. They are all cogs in the great, unpaid labour machine. In the evening, after a dinner as bland and predictable as breakfast, there is a brief period of what is called leisure. This too is a carefully managed affair. Once a month there might be a dance. The asylum band plays slightly out of tune waltzes, and you are made to dance with other female patients under the watchful eyes of the staff, a grim pantomime of joy. Sometimes a magic lantern show is projected onto a sheet, displaying biblical scenes or pictures from a moral travelogue. There is a library, but it is filled only with religious tracts and dry, approved literature, stripped of any passion or imagination that might dangerously stimulate a disordered mind. There is no escape from the work, and there is no escape from the surveillance. You are watched constantly. The attendants patrol the wards, their hands behind their backs, their eyes scanning for any sign of trouble, any deviation from the routine. Even in the most private moments, you are not alone. The lavatory doors are sawn in half or removed entirely. The bathtubs are in open rooms. You are a component in a machine, and the machine must be observed at all times to ensure it is functioning correctly. Your only respite is sleep, a few hours of uneasy unconsciousness in a crowded room filled with the sighs and murmurs of 50 other trapped souls, before the bell rings again and the day repeats itself. You quickly learn that this city of the mad has its own rigid and unforgiving caste system. Not all inmates are created equal. The first and most obvious division is by class. Tucked away in the central building, closer to the doctor's offices and the main entrance, are the private patients. These are the wealthy, the aristocrats, the wives and daughters of industrialists, whose families pay a hefty premium for their care. They do not wear the coarse uniform. They wear their own clothes of silk and fine wool. They do not live in crowded dormitories. They have private rooms, often decorated with furniture from their own homes, and sometimes attended by a personal servant. They do not eat porridge and gruel. Their meals are brought from the superintendent's own kitchen, served on fine china. They are exempt from the grueling labor, spending their days reading, playing piano, painting watercolors, or taking gentle, supervised walks in the private gardens. Their experience of the asylum is one of a restrictive and profoundly boring hotel. You, a pauper or middle-class patient, are a different species. You live in the squalor of the public wards. You eat the subsistence-level food. You perform the endless, unpaid labor. Your existence is what makes their comfort possible. You see them sometimes, on their chaperoned walks, and you understand the profound, unbridgeable gulf that separates you. Even in madness, the rigid class structure of the Victorian world is perfectly, cruelly preserved. The final hierarchy is the most terrifying. It is the hierarchy of madness itself, a geography of despair mapped out by the asylum's very architecture. Your ward is for the quiet and tractable. You are here because you are still considered salvageable, capable of following orders and performing your work. But you are acutely aware of the other wards. Through the locked doors at the end of your corridor is the ward for the epileptics and uncontrollables. From it comes the sound of sudden, violent fits, of struggles against restraints, of a primal rage that is met with overwhelming force by the burly male attendants who are called in to handle such emergencies. And beyond that, at the furthest, most isolated end of the asylum's wing, often in a separate, more secure building, is the back ward. It is known as the refractory or incurable ward. This is the asylum's dungeon, the place where the most hopeless cases are hidden away from all sight, even from most of the staff. The women who live here have been in the asylum for 10, 20, 40 years. They are the ones for whom moral therapy has failed, the ones whose minds have been permanently broken by their illness, or, more often, by the cures meant to save them. Sometimes a door is left open by mistake, and you catch a glimpse inside. You see women rocking endlessly in corners, muttering to themselves. You see faces devoid of all expression, all light, their humanity seemingly extinguished by years of neglect. You see bodies contorted by decades of restraint, or sedated into a permanent stupor by opiates. You smell a deeper, more profound squalor, a sense of absolute and final abandonment. These women are the ghosts of the asylum. They are a living, breathing testament to the institution's ultimate failure. They are a silent warning of what you could become. And with a sickening, cold dread, you realize that this is not just a hierarchy of sickness. It is a potential path. Every patient in this place is on a trajectory, and the back ward is the final destination. The dread of this future, of this ultimate dehumanization, becomes a constant companion, a quiet whisper in the back of your mind that follows you through every long day and every terrifying night. The routine of the asylum is a slow, grinding erosion of the self. The monotony of the work, the lack of privacy, the constant surveillance, they are all designed to wear you down, to smooth out the difficult edges of your personality until you fit the placid, compliant mold of the ideal patient. But for many, this passive approach is not enough. Your grief persists. Your spirit, though battered, is not yet broken. You might refuse to work one day, a small act of rebellion. You might weep in frustration. You might argue with an attendant. These are not seen as rational responses to an oppressive environment. They are seen as symptoms of a deeper, more stubborn pathology. Your failure to improve through the gentle coercions of moral therapy and a structured routine means the doctors must now escalate their efforts. They must move from passive management to active intervention. They must take a more heroic approach. This is the central, terrifying philosophy of the asylum's medical wing, that a disordered mind stuck in a ruinous pattern can only be reset by a powerful shock to the system. The body and the brain, they believe, must be violently assaulted to be saved. You're about to be introduced to the doctor's arsenal. You're about to learn that the cure is the disease. Your first treatment is prescribed for a day when your sorrow is particularly acute, manifesting as what the doctors call agitation. The cure, they decide, is water. Hydrotherapy was one of the cornerstones of 19th century asylum treatment, a practice that ranged from the seemingly benign to the openly brutal. It was based on the ancient idea that water could soothe, stimulate, or shock the nervous system into a state of balance. You are taken by two strong nurses to the hydrotherapy suite. It is a cold, tiled room that echoes with the sound of dripping water, a place of dread whispered about in the dormitories. You are stripped and led to a large coffin-like tub made of cast iron. It is filled to the brim with water, and you can see blocks of ice floating on its surface. This is the prolonged bath, a treatment designed to cool your supposedly fevered, manic brain. You resist, a primal instinct screaming against the agonizing cold, but your struggles are useless. You are forcibly submerged, your head the only part of you above the surface. You are held down. The initial shock is a supernova of pain. The cold is so intense, it feels like being burned alive. Your body convulses. Your teeth chatter so violently you fear they will break. Every muscle seizes. You gasp for breath, your heart hammering against your ribs. The nurses hold you fast, their faces impassive. The treatment has begun. You are left in the icy water for hours. Time loses all meaning. The violent shivering eventually subsides into a deep, deathly numbness. Your skin turns blue. Your mind, once racing with panic and indignation, becomes slow, thick, and stupid. You are no longer thinking. You are merely enduring. When they finally pull you out, you are too weak and disoriented to protest, too cold to feel anything at all. You are wrapped in a coarse blanket and taken back to your ward. The doctor makes a note in your file. The patient appears much calmer after treatment. On another day, for a similar infraction, you are subjected to the wet sheet pack. You are laid on a bed and wrapped tightly and expertly in sheets that have been soaked in ice-cold water. You are wound like a mummy from your neck to your toes, so tightly you can barely breathe. Your arms are pinned to your sides. You are completely immobilized. At first, the cold is intense, the violent shivering returning. But then, a new phase begins. Your own body heat begins to warm the wet sheets, and your cocoon becomes a suffocating steam bath. You are left like this for an entire day, unable to move, unable to see anything but the ceiling, alone with the sound of your own frantic heartbeat. It is a form of sensory deprivation, a living burial. The mind, starved of all stimulus, begins to turn on itself. But hydrotherapy had a more direct, more punitive application. It was called the douche. If you are particularly defiant, you are taken back to the tiled room and strapped into a heavy wooden chair, your limbs and head immobilized. A few feet away, an attendant holds what looks like a fireman's hose. On the doctor's order, a high-pressure jet of ice-cold water slams into you. It feels like being beaten with a club. It knocks the breath from your lungs, stings your skin, and leaves you gasping and traumatized. This is not therapy. This is punishment, delivered under the guise of medicine. It is a lesson in compliance, taught with brutal, chilling efficiency. When water fails to break your spirit, the next step in the doctor's arsenal is the denial of all movement, all freedom. Restraint, like hydrotherapy, was not seen merely as a tool for safety. It was championed as a primary treatment in itself. The theory, championed by men like the American father of psychiatry, Dr. Benjamin Rush, was that by completely immobilizing the body, the chaotic energy of the mind would be forced to subside. The patient, unable to physically express their madness, would be compelled towards a state of inner calm. And so, you are introduced to the restraint chair. It is a heavy, throne-like piece of furniture, built of thick oak. But it is not a throne of comfort. It is fitted with a series of thick leather straps for your ankles, your wrists, your waist, and your chest. A wooden box can be placed over your head to contain spitting or biting. A hole in the seat with a bucket beneath completes the design. You are strapped in, every limb cinched down so tightly that movement is impossible. You are left there for hours, for days, your muscles cramping, your joints screaming in agony. It is a waking paralysis, a state of absolute helplessness. Or perhaps you are placed in the camisole de force, the straitjacket. It is a canvas jacket with enormously long sleeves, which are crossed over your chest and tied tightly behind your back, pinning your arms in an agonizingly unnatural position. The more you struggle, the tighter the canvas binds. The physical pain is immense, but the psychological torment is worse. The inability to scratch an itch, to wipe your own face, to defend yourself, to perform the simplest human gesture is a profound and deep violation. The ultimate form of this treatment is seclusion. You are taken to a small, windowless room. The walls, the floor, and even the heavy door are covered in thick, horsehair-filled padding. This is the padded cell. When the door is closed, you are plunged into a world of absolute sensory deprivation. The silence is total, a thick, deadening weight that presses in on you. The darkness is absolute, a blackness your eyes can never adjust to. There is no human contact. Your food is pushed through a small slot in the door. Time dissolves. The boundary between waking and dreaming blurs. You are alone with your own mind, which, under this immense pressure, begins to fracture. You might start to see things in the oppressive darkness, to hear whispers in the profound silence. You are being driven mad by the very cure that was meant to save you. When these external assaults on your body prove insufficient, the asylum's medical philosophy dictates that the attack must be turned inward. For centuries, a dominant theory of medicine held that illness, both physical and mental, was caused by an imbalance of the four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The Victorians updated this idea with a new theory of auto-intoxication. They believed that poisons, generated by undigested food putrefying in the gut, could be absorbed into the bloodstream and travel to the brain, causing irritation, excitement, and madness. The logical cure, therefore, was to violently and completely purge the body of its contents. You are now subjected to a regimen of poisons and purges. You are forced to drink a foul-tasting concoction containing tartar emetic, a compound of antimony. Within minutes, you are seized by waves of violent, uncontrollable vomiting that leave you weak and dehydrated, your throat raw. Or you are given a dose of calomel, a compound of mercury chloride, one of the most common purgatives of the age. It causes explosive, agonizing diarrhea that can last for days, leaving you drained and depleted. The doctors and nurses observe these violent bodily expulsions with satisfaction. They are not seeing a person being poisoned. They are seeing a patient being cleansed, the physical source of their madness being expelled from the body. The horrifying irony is that mercury is a potent neurotoxin. The very cure they administered could, over time, cause the very brain damage and insanity they were attempting to treat. But there is one final frontier, one last, desperate and audacious assault. When hydrotherapy, restraint, and purges have all failed, when your spirit remains stubbornly, inconveniently intact, the doctors decide that they must attack the very organ of the mind itself. They must go into your brain. The idea was born in the late 19th century. Neurologists observed that patients who suffered damage to the frontal lobes of their brain often became passive and emotionally blunted. A perverse idea began to take hold. Could this effect be surgically induced? Could a difficult, agitated patient be rendered calm by deliberately severing the delicate connections in the front of their brain? In the 1930s, the Portuguese neurologist Egas Moniz developed a procedure he called a leucotomy, drilling holes into a patient's skull and injecting alcohol to destroy the nerve pathways. It was a crude and brutal surgery, but for it he won the Nobel Prize. The era of psychosurgery had begun. The man who would bring this procedure to the masses, who would perfect it into a horrifyingly efficient technique, was an American neurologist named Dr. Walter Freeman. He was a showman, a charismatic crusader with a profound sense of his own destiny. He saw himself as a savior, a liberator of the thousands of hopeless patients languishing in the back wards of state asylums. He developed a new, faster method, one that required no drill, no operating room, no anesthesia. He called it the transorbital lobotomy. It quickly earned a more chilling nickname, the ice pick lobotomy. You first hear of it in whispers on the ward. A new doctor is coming, a man who performs miracles. The most difficult patients, the ones who scream and fight, are taken away to see him. When they return, they are different. They are quiet, eerily quiet. They are docile, childlike. They shuffle through the halls with placid, empty smiles on their faces. The fight has gone out of them. The person they once were has been extinguished. The fear on the ward becomes a palpable thing. And one day, you see it. Or you hear the story from a trembling nurse who witnessed it. Dr. Freeman arrives, confident and theatrical. He has his instrument, a tool modelled on a common ice pick from his kitchen drawer. It is called an orbitoclast. The patient, often a woman diagnosed with chronic agitation, is rendered unconscious with a brief, violent electroshock. Then, Freeman lifts the patient's eyelid. He inserts the sharp point of the orbitoclast into the corner of the eye socket, between the eyeball and the bone. With a small mallet, he taps it, driving it through the thin layer of bone and into the frontal lobes of the brain. Then, he sweeps the instrument back and forth, like a windshield wiper, severing the delicate nerve fibers that govern personality, emotion, and executive function. He withdraws the instrument, repeats the process on the other side, and in less than 10 minutes, the procedure is complete. This was his great innovation. Psychosurgery as a cheap, mass-production, outpatient procedure. He travelled the country in a van he called his lobotomobile, performing thousands of these operations. He taught the technique to asylum physicians who lacked any surgical training. The results were catastrophic. While a small number of patients were arguably helped, a far greater number were left emotionally blunted, intellectually crippled, or in a permanent vegetative state. There were failures, hemorrhages, deaths. But the successful cases were defined by one metric. The patient was easier to manage. They were no longer a problem. And now, you live with this new and final terror. It is the ultimate tool of control. The threat of hydrotherapy was painful. The threat of restraint was maddening. But the threat of the lobotomy is the threat of the annihilation of the self. Every time you feel a surge of anger, every time you want to cry out in protest, you choke it down. You force a placid smile onto your face. You become a model of compliance, because you know that any act of defiance, any emotional outburst, any failure to submit completely could earn you a visit from the man with the ice pick. You are trapped not just by the asylum's walls, but by the visceral, intimate fear of a cure that is worse than any conceivable disease. The human spirit is not so easily extinguished. After months, perhaps years, of submission, a new resolve hardens within you. You have witnessed the horrors of the so-called cures. You have endured the dehumanizing routine. You have seen the vacant eyes of those who have surrendered completely. And you decide that you will not join them. You will not be broken. Your new strategy will not be defiance, not agitation, but a campaign of pure, unwavering rationality. You believe, with a desperate, flickering hope, that if you can just make them listen, if you can present the facts of your case with unimpeachable logic, the truth must prevail. You request a formal interview with the medical superintendent. You spend days rehearsing your arguments, marshalling your thoughts into a clear, orderly presentation. When the day comes, you walk into his office, not as a patient, but as an advocate for your own life. You do not weep. You do not raise your voice. You speak calmly and precisely. You address the details of your original commitment, explaining the context of your grief, a natural human response to loss. You point out the logical fallacies in the diagnosis of hysteria, contrasting the vague catch-all symptoms with your own lucid state of mind. You recount your daily behavior on the ward, your compliance, your diligence in your work, your quiet conduct, presenting it not as a sign of successful treatment, but as proof of your baseline sanity. You are articulate, you are reasonable, you are sane, and you have just sealed your own fate. The superintendent listens, his head tilted in that familiar attitude of paternalistic concern. He nods, making occasional notes. He lets you speak until you have exhausted your arguments. When you are finished, a heavy silence fills the room. He looks at you, a faint, pitying smile on his lips. "I admire your spirit," he says, his voice soft. "And the complexity of your reasoning is truly fascinating. A remarkable example of the mind's ability to construct a coherent narrative, to protect itself from a difficult truth. He does not argue with your points. He simply absorbs them into the pathology he has already constructed. Later, you learn from a sympathetic nurse what he wrote in your file that day. Patient presented today with a highly elaborate and systematized delusional structure regarding her commitment. She argues her case with a cunning and almost legalistic logic, a clear sign of the deeper entrenchment of her malady. She suffers from a profound lack of insight into her own condition, a classic and most troubling symptom. This is the asylum's ultimate trap, its perfect, unassailable fortress of logic. It is an argument that can never be won, because the rules are written by your opponent. Every move you make, every word you speak, is reinterpreted through the lens of your supposed madness. If you are emotional, you are hysterical. If you are silent, you are withdrawn and melancholic. And if you are rational, you are cunning and delusional. Your sanity has become the most damning evidence of your insanity. It is in this moment that the true nature of your hopelessness becomes clear. You are not in a hospital from which you can be cured. You are in a maze from which there is no exit. The despair that follows this realization is deeper and colder than any you have felt before. You begin to observe your fellow inmates with new eyes. You are not just surrounded by madness. You are surrounded by injustice. You are not the only sane person in this madhouse. Your story, you realize, is just one among hundreds. You see the artist, a man in his 50s whose paintings, once celebrated for their vibrant, chaotic energy, are now locked away. He was committed by his children, who were embarrassed by his eccentricities, his passionate gestures, his habit of working for days without sleep in a frenzy of creation, his loud, booming laughter. In the outside world, he was a genius. In here, his artistic fervor has been relabeled as mania. His passion is a pathology. He sits for hours, staring at his hands, his creative fire extinguished by the asylum's relentless routine. You see the political dissenter. He is an Irish immigrant who, in the slums of New York or London, found his voice speaking at socialist rallies, demanding fair wages and an end to exploitation. He spoke with a fiery, righteous anger against the injustices he witnessed. His pamphlets were declared seditious, and his passion was diagnosed by a wealthy factory owner's doctor as paranoia with delusions of grandeur. He is not a threat to the political order. He is simply ill. Here, in the asylum, his silence is ensured more effectively than it ever could have been in a prison. And you see the heiress. She is a young woman, not yet 25, whose wealthy father died and left his entire estate to her, bypassing his own brothers. Her uncles, furious at being denied their inheritance, conspired. They paid a visit to a prominent alienist, a doctor of the mind, and spoke in grave tones of their niece's erratic behavior, her moral instability, her unfitness to manage her own affairs. It took only one doctor's signature. She was committed, and her uncles were granted guardianship of her estate. She sits by the barred window, her face a pale mask of disbelief, a prisoner of greed, her fortune now paying for the very walls that keep her captive. You see them, and dozens more like them, and you understand the asylum for what it truly is, a tool, a convenient, medically sanctioned way to silence rebellious artists, to neutralize political threats, and to steal a woman's inheritance. It is a dumping ground for the inconvenient. Seeing their stories reflected in your own brings a strange, cold comfort, the camaraderie of the damned. But it also deepens your despair. The walls are not just brick and mortar, they are built of law, of science, of greed, and of social convention. They are impenetrable. Then, one autumn, a new face appears on the ward. She is young, with dark, intense eyes. She seems lost, frightened, her gaze distant and unfocused. The attendants treat her with their usual mixture of contempt and indifference. The doctors diagnose her with a clear case of dementia, but you notice something different in her eyes. It is not the vacant look of the truly lost, nor the panicked terror of the newly committed. It is a look of sharp, unwavering focus. She is not just seeing, she is observing, she is memorizing. Her name, they say, is Nellie Brown. This is a lie. Her real name is Elizabeth Cochran, but the world will come to know her as Nellie Bly. She is a reporter, a pioneer of a new, daring form of investigative journalism for Joseph Pulitzer's sensational newspaper, The New York World. Her editor has given her an assignment of unprecedented danger and audacity to feign insanity, get herself committed to the most notorious public asylum in America, the Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island, a grim repository in New York's East River, and to expose the truth of what happens inside its walls. Her preparations are meticulous. She practices looking demented in front of a mirror. She stops brushing her hair. She checks into a cheap boarding house for working women and begins to act erratically. She refuses to sleep, claiming she is afraid of the other boarders. She moans and cries out that she has lost her trunks. The landlady, frightened, calls the police. Nellie is taken before a judge. She feigns amnesia. The judge, convinced she is positively demented, orders her sent to Bellevue Hospital for psychiatric examination. There, a series of doctors question her. She answers their questions truthfully, but they have already decided she is mad. "I am convinced she is insane," one doctor declares. "I would have to be insane to think her sane." The catch-22 works perfectly. Within 24 hours, Nellie Bly is a passenger on the ferry to Blackwell's Island, a place spoken of in whispers by the poor of New York, a place from which few ever returned. The moment she is through the gates, she drops her act. She begins to behave and speak as she normally would, but it is too late. The label of insane is now permanently affixed to her. Her new, rational behavior is completely ignored. Her journey, and the journey of the viewer through her eyes now begins. She narrates a story that confirms your deepest fears. The food is a horror: stale, black bread, meat that is little more than gristle and bone, rancid butter, and a foul-tasting, cold tea. The water is brackish. She describes the cold baths, a ritual of humiliation and suffering. Patients are stripped and forced into a tub of shared, dirty, icy water. 3 buckets of freezing water are poured over their heads, while the nurses laugh and taunt them. She speaks of the cold that permeates the entire institution, a deep, bone-chilling cold that is never relieved by the thin, inadequate blankets. She details the abuse. The nurses are not healers, they are tyrants. They choke patients for speaking out of turn. They beat them, pull their hair, and pinch them. They taunt the foreign women who cannot speak English, treating their confusion as insolence. Nellie soon discovers the most shocking truth of all. Many of her fellow inmates are not insane. They are immigrants, poor women from Germany or Italy, who were exhausted or ill and could not make themselves understood to the authorities. They were swept up by the system, diagnosed as mad simply because they were foreign and destitute, and now they are trapped, their protests unheard, their sanity eroding daily in the face of constant abuse and neglect. For 10 days, Nellie Bly lives this nightmare. She endures the cold, the hunger, the filth, and the cruelty. She documents it all, her mind a sharp, focused instrument of witness in a world of chaos. Finally, as prearranged, a lawyer from the New York World arrives and secures her release. Her story, 10 Days in a Madhouse, is published in a series of articles that shock the city and the nation. The public, who had been comforted by the image of the asylum as a benevolent sanctuary, is now confronted with an undeniable, first-hand account of its depraved reality. The outrage is immediate and immense. A grand jury is convened. They launch a full-scale investigation, and Nellie Bly accompanies them back to Blackwood Island, this time not as a patient, but as an accuser. The impact is revolutionary. As a direct result of her expose, the city of New York allocates an additional $1 million per year to the care of the mentally ill, an unheard of sum. Abusive nurses are fired. Translators are hired to ensure immigrant patients can be properly understood. The procedures for examination and commitment are reformed. Nellie Bly's courage did not just create a sensational story, it created real, tangible change. She proved that the walls were not, after all, impenetrable. Back on your ward, in your asylum, hundreds of miles away, the story arrives as a rumor. A whisper passed from patient to patient. A clipped article from a newspaper smuggled in by a kind attendant. And as you hear it, you feel something you have not felt in a very long time. It is not the dull ache of despair or the sharp sting of fear. It is a flicker of light in the profound darkness. Your experience is real. Your suffering is not invisible. Someone from the outside world has seen the truth, has spoken the truth, and has made others listen. For the first time, you realize that while you may be powerless, the truth itself is not. And that truth, once unleashed, has a power all its own. The despair that has been your constant companion does not vanish, but for the first time, it is joined by a new and unfamiliar feeling, a glimmer of resistance. The news of Nellie Bly's expose arrives on your ward like a single ray of light piercing the deep gloom. It is a rumor, a whispered story of a woman who fooled the doctors, who saw the truth of this place and had the courage to tell the world. For the first time since the great oak doors closed behind you, you feel a flicker of something other than despair. It is a dangerous, fragile hope. Her story validates your own. It proves you are not imagining the cruelty, the neglect. It proves you are not alone. But does this glimmer of resistance save you? Does this public outcry, this sudden flurry of investigations and reforms, lead to your release? For most, the answer was no. The asylum system was a vast, sprawling beast. A single newspaper story, however sensational, could wound it, but it could not kill it. The inertia of bureaucracy, the deep-seated prejudices of the medical establishment, and the simple, terrible fact that society still needed a place to put its inconvenient people, meant that for the vast majority, the walls remained as high as ever. Nellie Bly escaped because the outside world was waiting to pull her out. For you, there is no one coming. And so, what is your ultimate fate? History does not record the final chapter for every patient. Your story, like countless others, fades into the quiet, dusty archives of the institution. We are left only to imagine the outcome. Perhaps your spirit, so long battered, finally breaks. You succumb to one of the treatments. A fever takes you after a prolonged session in the hydrotherapy suite. An infection from an unsterilized surgical instrument proves fatal. Or perhaps you are chosen for a lobotomy, and the procedure goes wrong, leaving you in a silent, vegetative state, another casualty of a doctor's ambition. Or perhaps you achieve the only form of survival this place truly allows. You learn the lesson of compliance. You extinguish the fire of your own personality, burying it so deep that no one can ever see it burn again. You learn to smile placidly, to perform your tasks without complaint, to empty your face of all thought and all feeling. You become the model patient the doctors always wanted, a hollow, docile shell. You are released, not because you are cured, but because you are no longer a problem. You return to a world that no longer recognizes you, a ghost at the feast of your own life. Or perhaps the most common fate of all is yours. You simply remain. The years turn into decades. The world outside changes in ways you cannot imagine. New wars are fought, new technologies are invented, but your world remains the same. The bell, the ward, the work. Your family stops visiting. The doctors who committed you retire or die. You become a lifer, a permanent resident of this silent city. You grow old within its walls, your grief a distant, forgotten memory, replaced by the deep, institutional patina of resignation. And one day, in the quiet of the dormitory, your long journey ends. A nurse discovers you in the morning, and a doctor signs your death certificate, making one final note in your file, a single, damning word that serves as your only epitaph: incurable. Your story, and the stories of millions like you, ended within these walls. But the walls themselves have a story, and it, too, is one of slow, inexorable decay. The great age of the asylum, the era of the magnificent Kirkbride Palace, could not last forever. The 20th century brought new ideas, new horrors, and new medicines that would render the entire system obsolete. The First World War dealt a major blow to the asylum's moral authority. A generation of young men returned from the trenches of Flanders and the Somme, their minds shattered by the industrial horror of modern warfare. They suffered from shell shock, a condition of uncontrollable tremors, nightmares, and paralytic fear. These were not degenerate paupers or hysterical women. They were national heroes. Society could not simply lock them away and label them insane. For the first time, psychological trauma was seen not as an individual failing, but as a devastating wound inflicted by an overwhelming experience. Psychiatry was forced to look beyond the asylum walls, to confront the mind's fragility in the real world. But the true death knell of the asylum was not a new idea. It was a new invention. It was chemistry. In the early 1950s, a French pharmaceutical company developed a powerful tranquilizer called chlorpromazine. marketed under the trade name Thorazine. It was discovered to have a profound effect on psychotic symptoms, calming agitation, reducing hallucinations, and clearing delusional thinking. It was hailed as a chemical lobotomy, a miracle drug that could do what a century of hydrotherapy and moral treatment could not. Soon, a revolution in psychopharmacology swept the globe. A new arsenal of antipsychotics, antidepressants, and anti-anxiety medications became available. These drugs were not a cure, but they offered something the asylum never could: control over symptoms. A patient who was once considered uncontrollably violent could now be rendered calm and manageable with a daily pill. The fundamental justification for the vast, isolated institution, the need to contain and control large numbers of difficult people, was beginning to crumble. This chemical revolution coincided with a new social and political movement: deinstitutionalization. From the 1960s onwards, a coalition of civil rights lawyers, patient advocates, and fiscal conservatives began to argue for the closure of the great state hospitals. They argued that confining people against their will was a violation of their human rights. They argued that care could be delivered more effectively and more humanely in the community. And, most persuasively for politicians, they argued that closing these massive, expensive institutions would save the government vast sums of money. And so, the exodus began. The great palaces of misery began to empty. Patients who had known no other home for 50 years were discharged into a world they no longer understood, often with little more than a bus ticket and a bottle of pills. The system of community care that was promised was often underfunded and inadequate, a tragic story in its own right. But the age of the Great Asylum was officially over. The buildings themselves were left to decay. Too large to be repurposed, too expensive to maintain, too haunted by the memories of the past, they were abandoned. Today, they are magnificent ruins. Their Gothic towers stand like skeletal fingers against the sky. Ivy snakes through the barred windows. Nature is slowly, patiently reclaiming the land. They have become a magnet for photographers, for ghost hunters, for anyone drawn to the beauty of decay. But to see them only as romantic ruins is to miss the profound and haunting lesson they represent. The true horror of the Victorian asylum was not a failure of architecture, but a failure of empathy. It was not just a story of bad science, but of a profound and willful refusal to see the person behind the patient, to hear the truth behind the diagnosis. The great tragedy of this era was not that doctors lacked the tools to cure the mind, but that they so often lacked the simple humanity to comfort the soul. The central thesis of the asylum was that the patient was the problem. But the institution was never just a hospital. It was a mirror, held up to the society that created it. And in its reflection, we see a culture terrified of what it could not control. It was terrified of female desire, of intellectual passion, of political dissent, of emotional excess, of poverty, and of old age. The asylum was the solution. It was a vast, sprawling, and scientifically justified closet into which a society could hide away its deepest fears. The true sickness was not in the patients who were locked inside, but in the culture of conformity that demanded the construction of the cage. And so, we are left with the lingering shadow of Bedlam. The great asylum buildings may be empty, their corridors silent for the first time in a century, but the questions they pose still echo, haunting the landscape of our modern world. How do we, today, define what is normal? Who gets to decide? Where is the line between a personality trait and a pathology, between an eccentricity and a symptom? How do we ensure that our modern treatments, our sophisticated drugs, our complex therapies, our own clinical institutions, are truly tools of liberation and not just more subtle, more sophisticated cages? The shadow of Bedlam is long. It reminds us that the line between treatment and control, between healing and punishment is, and has always been, dangerously, terrifyingly thin. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of history's darkest chapters. If you believe these complex and often disturbing stories from our past must be remembered, please consider liking this video. To continue exploring the shadows of history with us, we invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue this work and bring these forgotten histories to light. We welcome your reflections in the comments below.